Would you say that your life is peaceful?
In today's age, I think it's very difficult for anyone to find peace.
Would you consider your life peaceful?
No. The job is really stressful, so overall no, but I try to do what I can to get by, so.
Where does peace come from?
Inside, I think.
Peace comes from being totally happy with yourself and your decisions. You can't totally be happy if you have questions in your mind, and that's where I think total peace comes from.
We're kicking off a brand new series. It's only 2 weeks long, but it's a series called Peace of Mind. See, here's the idea. After months of the COVID-19 pandemic, massive closures, millions of jobs being lost, racial unrest, and so much more, peace of mind can be kind of a hard thing to find. And so we thought we would spend a short time talking about God's Word and interacting around the idea of peace of mind as it relates to mental health. Now, you may remember, and if you don't, you can certainly find it in the media archives on the Concordia webpage, but some time ago we did a sermon series on the soul. What is the soul? And when we talked about the soul, as you can see in this diagram, we talked about the fact that the soul is the sum total of all that we are. So it's our body, it's our mind, it's our spirit, it's all of the things that happen. In fact, as you can see on this diagram, we don't list all of that, but there's room in between those other circles, because it's the things that happen to us, it's the things that we do, it's the attitudes that we have. Our soul is the sum total of us. And when we struggle, when we deal with mental illness, it really is a point where our soul is sick or our soul is hurting. And so as we move through this series, it's going to be interesting because we've never quite done it like this before, but it's sort of a to be continued sermon series. I don't know if you ever watched the show Lassie. Lassie was a show that we watched every Sunday night when I was a kid. And if you don't know who Lassie is, let me just tell you, Lassie was this absolutely magnificent collie that was like a human being and always knew what was going on and always led the people to the place where something was wrong and always saved the day. But invariably, Lassie would begin a story, and then you'd get to the end of the time period, and these dreaded words would come on the screen. To be continued. Well, I'm not suggesting that this message is nearly as engaging as a Lassie television program. But at the end of this message, we're really going to say to be continued. Because we're going to begin in the story of Elijah and we're going to continue on with that very same story next weekend. But we're going to tackle today the idea of mental illness as it relates to body and mind. Now, I also realize when I say mental illness, I'm talking about a very broad category. And so really what I want to focus on is the topic of depression. And be sure to understand, this message is not intended to be a replacement for a therapist or a psychiatrist. It's not intended to diagnose anything or anyone. It's really intended to raise your awareness, to make you aware, to cause all of us to pause and think about our mental well-being, to think about this issue of depression that is running rampant in our society, and really allow us to ask the question, am I doing okay? Or do I need some help? You know, there's some interesting statistics that we should probably be aware of, and if you haven't heard these, they may be coming as a shock to you. A recent study shows that the symptoms of depression in people across the country have increased 300% since this COVID-19 pandemic began. In addition to that, the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 56% of all adults in the U.S. report that they are experiencing negative emotions, negative mental well-being as a result of COVID-19 and all the related factors. One more statistic. Text messages to a federal agency for mental health were up 1,000% in 2020, just this short part of 2020, over against all of 2019. See, the truth is, dear brothers and sisters, we're facing a real mental health challenge right now. And it's important for us to talk about it, to put it on the table. But again, I want to remind you, As we talk about this, as we think about it, I'm going to give you some resources, some numbers that you can call if you're struggling, but do not allow this message to serve as a replacement for real mental health expertise. Having said that, I mentioned that we're going to talk about the story of Elijah. It's a very famous biblical story, and Elijah himself is maybe the most famous prophet in Israel history. I mean, he's the big deal. And the Israelites saw him as being this amazing prophet who was a part of their life, a foundation that they built their whole understanding of God and their relationship with God on. Well, lo and behold, in this famous story, this big deal, this major prophet Elijah, is struggling with significant mental health concerns. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 18, and I'm going to kind of tell the story. I'd encourage you to go back and read this story because it's awesome. But it starts like this. There is a king of the northern kingdom of Israel called Ahab. He is not a good king. He is not a good man. He's a bad guy. And he marries a woman by the name of Jezebel. So she becomes queen. Now, you've probably heard the name Jezebel, and it doesn't have good connotations to this very day. Well, lo and behold, Jezebel is not just the queen, but Jezebel brings with her, she imports to Israel the worship of her pagan god, Baal. Ahab embraces the worship of Baal. And Baal begins to spread among the people of Israel. Well, Elijah's job is to speak to the people of Israel, to protect them from false gods. And so Elijah finally issues a challenge. He decides that one of the things that he can do is issue a challenge, a contest, to demonstrate the truth and the power of the God of Israel, Yahweh, and the absolute worthlessness of Baal. And so he says, how long will you waver between two options? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. And the challenge that he suggests is that they build two altars up on a mountaintop. In fact, when Julie and I were in Israel, we were actually on that mountaintop. And of course, you can't see where the altars were, but I remember seeing the altar in the Kishon Valley that comes up a little later in the story. And so Elijah says, let's build two altars. One altar to the God of Israel, and one altar to the god Baal. And then we will pray and we will sacrifice. And whichever god rains down fire and consumes the sacrifice, that God is real. That's the God we should worship. Well, again, you really, really need to read the story because it's amazing and it's powerful, but let me cut to the chase. Our God wins. He rains down fire that not only consumes the sacrifice, it consumes the very stone that the altar was made of. And it's an amazing victory. While Baal's priests pray and they contort themselves and they cut themselves and they do all kinds of crazy things, and nothing happens. And when this is all over, remember, Elijah's job is to protect the people of Israel and to speak the truth of God's word into their lives. Elijah sees to it that all of those false prophets, all of those false priests are eliminated. Well, remember, I told you that Jezebel was a worshiper of Baal. It was her god. She brought this god to the people of Israel. She promotes the worship of this god. And when she finds out what's happened, she is furious. She's embarrassed, and she's angry, and she wants revenge. And so Jezebel issues a hit, essentially. She says that she is absolutely guaranteeing. She sends word to Elijah, I promise you, by this time tomorrow, if you're not like one of the priests of Baal that's been slaughtered, well, I'm not good for my word. Now, it's interesting what happens next. Because you and I might think that Elijah has now become so confident. He is God's man in this place. He has had this amazing mountaintop spiritual victory. You might think that he would stand firm and have absolutely no concern about this queen, this false god worshiper threatening his life, but that's not how it goes. Elijah hears this threat and he's terrified. And in his terror, he takes off. And he goes for a long time. He runs until he's absolutely empty, absolutely out of any kind of spiritual, emotional, or physical energy whatsoever. And in verse 28 it says, he came to a broom tree bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Elijah has this great victory, this moment where it seems like he ought to be on top of the world. But lo and behold, just hours later, we find him absolutely discouraged, depressed. I mean, he literally says he just wants to die. Dear friends, I hope and pray that you're not in that place. But I also know that during this pandemic, the suicide rate, which is already at epidemic proportions in our society, that the suicide rate is way up. And so I want to encourage you, if you are feeling that way, if you just want to die, then let me encourage you to call the National Suicide Prevention Number. It's a hotline. You can call it any time, day or night. You can call it with absolute anonymity. The number is 800-273-8255. The number is here on the screen. If that's not something that you're willing to do, then call the church number. And during the regular office hours, someone will answer that phone. If it's after or outside of office hours, then it'll give you an emergency number to contact where one of our pastors will be able to respond. That number is 210-479-1477. Because if you're feeling like you want to die, you must get help. Remember, I said this message isn't a replacement. This message is not going to solve deep clinical depression. It's only to make us aware. It's only a cry from your pastor who loves you, saying, if you're struggling, if you're hurting in this way, then don't be isolated. Reach out and get the help you need. Because no matter how deep and dark it feels, no matter how great the anxiety is, no matter how much you believe that you're worthless and nobody cares, all of those are lies. And even when you're struggling in deep, dark depression, there's help and there's hope. So what I want to do as we move through the remainder of this message is share with you some points around the idea of depression. Now, also understand, I know there's a difference between feeling sad or having the blues and being clinically depressed. But let's also understand that being sad, being discouraged, feeling disoriented and detached from the world, those are symptoms of depression. And if those things remain in place over a long time, it can change our brain chemistry. It can lead to a more clinical problem. And so let's focus. Let's talk about dealing with depression from the standpoint of those sad feelings, those disoriented feelings, those places where life isn't quite right. Knowing that if it reaches a deeper place, if it persists for a longer period of time, we really need to get the help that's available to us. In fact, that actually brings me to the very first point that I want to cover. When it comes to dealing with depression, don't go it alone. You know, Elijah's struggle actually takes a dramatic turn for the worse when he becomes isolated. And we've talked about this in messages before. The devil loves to use this strategy. In fact, it's one of his favorite strategies. He loves to get us isolated. Whether it's because of guilt or shame or discouragement, he loves to get us to withdraw from the people around us, withdraw from the people who love us and care about us. He loves to get us alone because then he has his way in our heart and in our mind. In fact, recently I got an email from one of the nurses in our congregation who works with senior citizens. And she was talking about how in this COVID-19 season, as seniors are isolated to protect them from contracting the disease that can take their life, they've been struggling and suffering profoundly from discouragement and depression because isolation is toxic. We're not made to live in isolation. We have extroverts and introverts, but we all need other people. In fact, in 1 Kings chapter 19, beginning at verse 3, watch what happens. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. He separates from his servant, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. So Elijah leaves his servant there, and he goes off into the middle of nowhere, and he is completely alone. Dear friends, being alone doesn't help discouragement and depression. It doesn't make things better. It only tends to make them worse. When we're isolated from other people, we can turn to all kinds of unhealthy thoughts and unhealthy habits and unhealthy patterns of living. And when we're alone, suicidal thoughts can run rampant. We can turn to things like alcohol and drugs and other kinds of substances. We can fall back on those old habits and those old addictions. Please, if you are struggling, don't struggle alone. Get the professional help that you need. Think about it this way. I know that there's still, in this day and age, there is still a stigma that's attached to mental illness and to depression. But here's the thing. We mentioned before, depression and mental illness is a sickness of the soul. It's as real as a broken leg or an infection. And if we have something wrong with us, if we have something in our lives where we're struggling, we seek professional help. We seek a doctor to help us with a broken leg. We seek a doctor to help us when we need antibiotics. So why in the world would we hesitate to get professional help, medical professionals to help us when there's a sickness that attacks our soul, when we're battling something as dangerous and as debilitating as depression? Point number one, when we're dealing with depression, do not go it alone. Point number two, we've got to take care of our body. You know, what's interesting is that after Elijah does something that's not a good idea, he isolates himself. God actually prompts him to do two things that are really good. Picking up in verse 5. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. At once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. So Elijah sleeps a lot. He's worn out. He's discouraged. He's out of physical, emotional, and spiritual energy, and so he sleeps, and that's a good thing. You know, we tend to forget that our body and our emotions and our spiritual well-being are intimately connected. I love that diagram of the soul because it really brings to light the truth of how every part of our lives is connected to every other part. And when one part is suffering, the whole soul, our whole self, suffers. And so I love it that Elijah sleeps. You know, one of the recent studies demonstrated that people who suffer from insomnia are far more likely to become clinically depressed than people who sleep well. In fact, the same is true when it comes to our diet. There's several studies that have come out fairly recently that say when people have poor diets and that our diet is comprised of things that are unhealthy, that we are much more likely to report symptoms of depression. And the reverse is also true. When we have a healthy diet of healthy food and we have regular eating patterns, the likelihood of us having symptoms of depression go down. So when Elijah is struggling with depression, what's he do? Well, he gets some rest. Dear friends, we've talked about sleep before. In fact, one of the books that's actually helped me begin to be focused on trying to be better about sleep is a book called Why We Sleep. And the book is amazing because it articulates all of the places that the amazing effect that sleep has on our well-being, body, soul, and spirit. Elijah gets some rest, much needed rest. But Elijah also gets some food. Now, it's interesting because Elijah is living in a time when Israel is under a tremendous famine. It's hard for him to get the food that he needs to keep his blood sugar up and to have the energy that he needs. We know that there are many in our society who are struggling with food and healthy diets, but for most of us, that's not a problem. But it can be a problem when we don't make sure that we have healthy food, when we're having healthy diets, when we have healthy eating habits that actually promote well-being. Dear friends, we need to be thinking about if we're battling with feelings of depression, with sadness and the blues, if we feel like we've been in a rut in terms of our emotions, we need to be conscious of the fact that sleep and healthy diet are an important part of doing well. There's one more thing that Elijah does that's really, really important. He exercises. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 7, the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up, eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate, drank, and strengthened by that food, he traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. So Elijah essentially takes a 40-day hike, but he's gained the physical energy that he needs, and that exercise is an important part of his emotional and spiritual and physical well-being. In fact, there's a recent study that came out that said people who exercise regularly are also less likely to struggle with feelings of depression, and those who struggle with depression oftentimes find that those depressed feelings are alleviated by exercise. Brothers and sisters, when it comes to dealing with depression, we need to be conscious of our bodies and take care of our bodies. Point number 3, when it comes to dealing with depression, we've got to deal with it before it starts, whenever and wherever that's possible. Because here's the truth. Everyone, any one of us, can struggle with depression. Any one of us can feel depressed. Just a moment of personal honesty with you. As we were working our way through the early days of COVID-19, trying to figure out all of the truth about what was going on and getting nothing but conflicting reports, trying to figure out about worship and about school and about ministry and about people in the workplace, trying to understand how the disease might affect myself or my wife or my kids, trying to understand how we were going to move through and thinking about all of the economic impacts of shutting down. I have to tell you that the more I took in, the more I watched, the more I listened, the more I tried to process, I found myself becoming discouraged. I'm a guy who sleeps pretty hard and pretty well. And I found myself laying awake at night or waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to get back to sleep. I found myself falling into bad habits and bad patterns, and I found my spirits being discouraged. And I had to realize something had to change. The direction that I was going in body, mind, and spirit was not a healthy direction. And so what did I do? Well, I stopped watching the news. And you know that's always my advice. When we go through a difficult time, there's some kind of a disaster or a pandemic like this, stop watching the news and seeing those stories over and over and over again. Sleep more. Make sure that you're doing the things to keep healthy sleep habits a part of your life. Eat well. And one of the things that was helpful to me, I had fallen off my exercise plan. I was spending all of that exercise time watching videos and trying to figure out more information and seeing the same thing over and over again and being confused by it all. And I realized what I needed to do was stop watching and get back to exercise. One more thing, we'll talk more about this next week. I also realized that I needed to get back to a habit that I had been forming that was good. And it was the habit of practicing gratitude. I think we've probably all heard the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You know, there's a great preacher and pastor by the name of Ed Stetzer, and I love the way he frames this up. He talks about a thermometer and a thermostat. Now remember, a thermometer tells you the temperature of a particular place or thing. A thermostat actually adjusts that temperature. When it comes to our lives, we need to take our temperature. We need to pay attention to the thermometer of how we're doing emotionally. We need to ask ourselves an honest question and say, am I struggling anywhere? Am I beginning to have feelings that are unhealthy? Am I beginning to fall into bad habits or bad patterns? Am I losing my ability to empathize or sympathize with other people? Am I beginning to withdraw? Those are all things that we can take account of. We're essentially taking our own temperature when it comes to our emotional well-being. But if the answer is yes to any of those things, then we need to adjust the thermostat. Then we need to make some changes that can help us. And what we've talked about today are things that involve body and mind. Things that we can actually be aware of and focus on and try to make a difference for the good and for our own mental wellness. See, it's amazing how God has created us with such integration. It's amazing when we think about how we are a soul, and when that soul is suffering in any place, it affects the whole. If we're conscious of our temperature when it comes to emotional well-being, mental wellness, then we can adjust the thermostat to see improvement, to feel relief. Now, this is where we come to that part, to be continued, because I realize we're right in the middle of this story. And what happens next is absolutely amazing and so critically important, because Elijah has an encounter with God. When he finally reaches a point where he's healthy enough to even understand what's happening, he has an encounter with God that changes everything. And I desperately want you to be a part of part 2, because if we just understand body and mind, it's not enough. We need to understand body, mind, and spirit. Dear friends, hear me on this. If you are struggling, there is help. Reach out and get the help you need. Take in the resources that will help you make the adjustments. You know, the devil loves to tell us, especially when he gets us isolated and when we become discouraged, he loves to tell us that we are worthless and hopeless. But God's word has something else to say. In Ephesians chapter 1, there is this powerful section. And it says, before the foundation of the world was laid, God, knowing all of the brokenness and all of the sin, all of the things that would happen, he knew all about 2020. He knew all about the things in our lives, the good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses, the victories and the failures. He knows it all. And before the foundation of the world was laid, God chose to adopt you and me as his children. He chose to adopt you as his beloved child and pour his love into your life. Depression says there is no hope. God says, Jesus says, there's not just hope, there's life and victory. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you this day and we know that this is a difficult time. It's hard for me to imagine anyone who hasn't struggled to some extent, and we know there are some who are deeply discouraged. Lord, by the power of your Spirit, work in our lives to lift us from that place, to see the hope and promises of your word, to be strengthened body, mind, and spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, dear friends, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May he look upon you with his favor and give you his peace. And as you leave this place, go into the world and shine like stars in the universe with the message of life. Amen.